Hello friends, this is Scott, and today we're going to plant our pole beans up so they can grow up this big old trellis I have. It's about 12 feet tall, it looks like. Still have some remnants from last year's crop. It's still dried on there, but they'll grow up this nicely. The first step is I'm just poking some holes. I couldn't find my dibble today, so I'm just using a stick, and I'm poking about an inch deep, about 3 inches apart. And I'm doing a ring around the outside of this trellis as well as ring on the inside. Kind of grow them from both the front and the back of the wire on the trellis. Now I choose to grow pole beans in my garden because of the small gardening space. I want to grow vertically, not horizontally. Now bush beans, same planting process as the pole beans, except you don't need a trellis and they produce beans quicker, but you need more space as they only get a couple feet tall. Beans are one of the easiest crops to grow. The only thing that you have as a challenge is if your seed isn't good, or if it's old seed, sometimes it doesn't germinate well. And when the plants are first coming up, if you have slugs or snails, they'll get to the leaves of these plants and kill them. Now I'm going to show you two varieties I'm planting today. There's a Kentucky blue pole, and I have a Blue Lake pole bean. Now these seeds are at least a year old or maybe 2 years old, so I'm not sure if they're going to germinate very well. I'll give them a try though, and if they don't, I'll just replant. I always lose a few to the slugs and snails and have to come back to replant a few, but they catch up pretty quick. Now these seeds, I forgot to show you what they look like, so I'll get back up. They're just what you see is just a white seed. Most of them, some of them have spots on them, depends on the different varieties, but you treat them all the same. Now, there is a product called a garden inoculant that's kind of a powdery stuff that helps the plant take nitrogen from the air and put it on its roots, on these little nodules. For the life of me, could not find any garden inoculant this year, so I'm just going to plant without. It's not as critical if you've planted beans in this area before because the inoculant does stay in the soil, but I wish I could have found some, but I didn't. Also, sometimes I soak the seeds, but not always. So if you're going to soak them, you can soak them for a couple hours or you can soak them overnight. Now here's a look. I'm just laying them out before I bury them. It's always a good idea to lay them out so that you know where you've planted all your beans. If you can see, I've got inside and outside the ring, as I described, with the two different varieties. And they'll just grow up together and they both grow pretty much the same kind of pace. So really simple. But again, I'm not done with these seeds yet. I've got to push them down in the soil and cover them up. So I'm going to sit down on my nice new wall, and I'm just pushing them in and just making sure there's good soil contact. Again, this is the easiest planting process. It just takes a couple minutes. There's nothing to it. But I love green beans, and I love to have them in the garden, and I love to go out and pick fresh ones and cook them up with some bacon, and they're one of my favorite vegetables. So I've always got to have beans, and they don't take much space because they grow up right up this trellis, about 12 feet tall. And as always, I always water them in nicely. I'm not going to worry about mulching this bed. These plants will come up in between 7 and 14 days, and I'll just keep them wet. I'll just bring a hose or have the sprinkling system turned on and just make sure they stay damp. And as you see the brassicas in the background, they're doing great also. I'll give them a little bit of a drink. Now here's a few angles of the planted bean bed. Again, it doesn't take up much space. And the next thing I'll do is I'm going to show you the actual growth process from previous years of what to expect with beans as they come up. As you see my pond I'm putting in, it's starting to come together. But it's a beautiful little bed, and it'll be nice. Now when the beans first start popping out of the ground, this is what they look like. And they just come up and they start forming their little leaves, and they start getting their true leaves, and they just keep on growing. And then they start climbing. Beans are an amazing thing, at least pole beans. They climb a lot. As you see, there's a few empty spaces, but they're filled in pretty nicely over my previous years. And they start sending out these tendrils, and they wrap up onto the wire, and they just reach up for the sun, and they just keep on climbing. Now they'll start to flower and produce beans earlier, and then they just keep growing. Now beans are a vegetable that you have to keep picked. If you stop picking them once they start producing, they will stop producing. So you've always got to keep an eye on them. And beans are a little tricky because the beans are the color of the leaves, and sometimes they're a little hard to see. you kind of get a trained eye. But as you see, that they really thicken up as they climb, and they get thicker and thicker. And again, now you can kind of see why it's a little hard to find the beans sometimes. And they go all the way to the top and above. And a lot of times they climb up into my trees. I've got some flowering pear trees, and I'll have to end up picking up in there. Now, I like to plant them on the base of this wall because I can get up on the top tier and I can pick them without needing a ladder. And it's just, as you see, they're getting up there. And the yard, as you can tell from previous pictures, it really gets lush and green, and they really fill in nicely. And it does, shade some areas of the garden, but not a big deal, as it's only taken up maybe 3 or 4 feet of actual gardening space on horizontal space. But they fill in nicely, and they're kind of fun to watch grow. Now, beans are a nitrogen-fixing legume, as they take nitrogen from the air and put it in on their roots, and when the plants die off, the roots release the nitrogen. Now we're going to take a look at what the flowers look like as they first start to come out. And this is the first look at what a bean looks like as it's flowered and it's starting to produce a little bit of a bean form. But the flowers are just these little white flowers, very delicate flowers. You'll have flowers going all year long with mature beans as long as you keep them picked. And that's the critical point, is just keep picking them and they'll keep producing flowers. And you just got to keep hunting for beans. And it's like a scavenger hunt. Now here's a look at a green bean on the vine and a few other beans. And as you can kind of tell, they do kind of blend in. But you just got to kind of look down low, anything hanging. You've got to, but just imagine looking at this and trying to find the beans. If you let a few go to seed, then they'll shut the whole plant down. So we got to make sure we get them. And they get to be very sizable. Very nice beans, very tasty, very tender. You can let them go too long if you pick them late, but I like to pick them kind of medium-sized if I find them all, because they're the best tasting when they're a medium size. There you see a baby bean along with a mature bean right next to it. And they just keep on coming, and you see the various stages are all growing together. And they'll grow in various parts of the plant as the plant matures. Now, as you pick them, here's some of the nicest ones that I've had. And they are good sized, very nice. Now, beans usually start producing, toward the end of July, mid to end of the July, and they'll go all the way until the first frost if you do all your picking that you're supposed to do. And so you can always go out in the garden and have a little bit of a meal. And I usually have a harvest basket with me to pick, but sometimes I just use my shirt because that's all I got. Well, thanks for watching this video, and if you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.